Welcome to Brush and Beyond, where we see the world through an artist's eyes and learn to express our own worlds.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Brush and Beyond. Today we're going to be talking about Pointilism, painting with science. Today we're diving into an art movement where every single brushstroke is actually a tiny perfect dot. It's an incredible world where science and art meet each other in a way you would never expect. To jump right in, let's start with a visual puzzle. Taking a look at this image, what do you see? At first, you might think it's a jumbled mess of individual dots of color. There's no real image here, no form, just points. But when we zoom out and pull back a little bit, we can see a new painting. All those little dots suddenly snap into focus and a beautiful detailed scene appears right before your eyes. So what is this sorcery? Well, this technique has a name. It's called Pointilism. Pointilism is a revolutionary painting technique using tiny dots of pure color to form an image. Using this method, artists don't mix their paint on a palette. Instead, they put tiny dots of pure color onto the canvas and let your eyes and brain do the heavy lifting. The genius behind this was Georges Seurat. He was a famous French painter and the creator of Pointilism, and you really have to think of him as part artist and part scientist. Seurat used a very special way of painting. Instead of brushing on colors in a big stroke, he used tiny little dots. In today's lesson, we're going to learn about Seurat and his creative painting style. We'll also try using this fun dot painting in an art activity video later on, so stay tuned for that. Now, to understand why Seurat's idea was a huge deal, you have to picture the art scene in the 1880s. Everything was dominated by Impressionism. Impressionism involved the style of soft, blurry brushstrokes trying to capture a fleeting moment of light. But Seurat saw a flaw in that style. He believed that Impressionist painters mixed their colors on a palette and would result in dull and muddy colors. They lost their punch, so his solution was wild. He said instead of mixing paint, he would just use dots of pure color and trust that science of our own vision would do the rest. This is how Neo-Impressionism started. Neo-Impressionism artists believed that by the late 19th century, Impressionist painters like Monet had already made big breakthroughs in showing color. So instead of continuing to paint with their large brushstrokes, they used bold color blocks, like little dots, to create pictures. Let's briefly compare these two art styles. Impressionism captures a fleeting moment with a focus on feeling and spontaneity. The painting you see here is Monet's Impressionism Sunrise, and is a classic example of what Impressionist paintings look like. On the right, we can see Neo-Impressionism. Here you see Paul Signac's The Pine Tree at Saint-Tropez, which is a strong example of how Neo-Impressionism creates enduring order with a focus on logic and science. An easy way to spot this is that Impressionism usually looks more soft, quick, and brushy, while Neo-Impressionism looks planned and optical. Pointilism works as not some artistic trick, but pure science. Our brains do something called optical mixing. When our eyes see a bunch of tiny, distinct dots of color that are close together, it doesn't see them as separate dots, instead blending them into an automatic new color. Your mind literally becomes the mixing palette. And we can really understand this when we look at a clear example. An artist who places a tiny dot of pure yellow right next to a tiny dot of pure blue makes a green color to our perception. Our brain does the work and combines these two colors, although in reality on the canvas, the colors stay completely separate. Seurat believed that putting one dot of pure color next to another would allow our eyes to mix the colors automatically. He invented Pointilism because he loved studying color and science. It was also because this was the period when people invented electric lights and began to notice the magical feeling of light shining and glowing. Seurat wanted to carefully arrange tiny dots of color to enrich the color that everyone saw, making a more sparkling effect in our brains. So now, let's go back to a Sunday afternoon. This painting was a masterpiece created in 1884. Seurat was pioneering a concept that felt incredibly modern at the time and was decades and decades ahead of its time. He began painting it in 1884 and spent 2 years finishing it. In the picture, we can see people spending their time on the Grand Jetée on a bright Sunday afternoon. Some people are standing, some are sitting, and some are taking walks. The whole painting is made with lots and lots of tiny dots, and together they create a calm, bright, and peaceful feeling. You can see here that the dot was a perfect scientific union, and because of its repeatability, it allowed the artist to create a visual formula where colors would mix automatically. Le Grand Jeté is about 2 meters tall and 3 meters wide. Seurat often sketched outside first and then used dots to build the final painting back in his studio. After he finished this painting, he was only 26 years old, which is why many people considered him a genius. Sadly, he passed away at 31 years old. Even though he only painted for a short time, he left a huge mark on art history. Now, more than 130 years later, this painting appears in huge museums and art textbooks, and people all around the world remember him for his revolutionary ideas. If we want to make a painting look like this, we need to look carefully first at the relationship between color and light. Here we can compare two of Seurat's major large-scale masterpieces that he painted in his short lifetime. On the right, we can see A Sunday Afternoon on Le Grand Jeté. And on the left, we see the Bailers at Asnières. This was Seurat's first major large-scale composition, which is now residing in the National Gallery in London. Compared with many artists who focused on showing everyday life, Seurat cared more about how to arrange shapes and colors on the canvas. We can see that compositionally, both of these paintings are quite similar, using similar colors and ideas. We can also compare Seurat's color and dot ideas through the influence of Van Gogh, especially during Van Gogh's Paris period from 1886 to 1887. It's important to remember that Van Gogh did not copy Seurat's exact neat dots. Instead, he adopted the Neo-Impressionism into small touches, dashes, and broken strokes of color, which showed movement and was called the Pointillist touch. Van Gogh also admired Seurat's color use, calling it a fresh revelation of color. We can see on the top right, the painting that we know is A Sunday on Le Grand Jeté, which is a starting point of neatly arranged dots showing color. In the middle, we can see Vincent van Gogh's The Seine. This one is especially important to notice because the subject itself is tied to the same area that Seurat painted in. Finally, on the left, we can see Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait, where we notice his pointillist touch and short brushstrokes of color. While Seurat paints with more order and neatness, Van Gogh takes the idea of separated color and makes it more emotional and energetic. This matches the broader art history view that Van Gogh absorbed Neo-Impressionist color ideas but transformed them for his own expressive style. Seurat had an incredible legacy that proved that art could be both incredibly emotional and deeply scientific at the same time. He created a system that looks super complex, but the process itself is actually beautifully simple. This is where Seurat's revolutionary ideas get really mind-blowing. An artist in the 1880s created a huge image out of tiny points of colored light, all designed to be blended together by your eye. Does this sound familiar at all to you? Seurat's painstakingly placed dots were, in a way, the 19th century analog version of a digital concept that's incredibly important to our modern world. That concept is the pixel. The screen that you might be watching this on is made of millions of tiny points of red, green, and blue light, called the RGB system. Just like Seurat's dots, these pixels are arranged specifically in a grid so that your eye can optically mix them to form a clear, cohesive image. From an 1880s canvas to your 21st century screen, the core idea is exactly the same. Georges Seurat's revolutionary ideas of painting expanded far beyond just the art world. Here you can see a picture of the Art Institute of Chicago on March 15th of 2026, when I visited and got the chance to see the full-size Sunday on Le Grand Jeté. Right behind this were two smaller studies that Seurat created without the use of Pointilism. You can see that he derives his color theory and optical mixing based on the original picture that he paints with just the colors he intends to create. Additionally, just a few days ago, Ben Platt wore his inspiration in the form of a custom Tanner Fletcher suit designed with scenes pulled straight from Georges Seurat's 1884 painting, A Sunday Afternoon on Le Grand Jeté. Fletcher wrote in May 2026 that the ensemble took over 120 hours of hand painting, embroidering, and beading on silk wool. We can see that Georges Seurat's impact as an artist, although he died young, was revolutionary, and he completely transformed the way that modern artists approached art. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to join us for our Georges Seurat-inspired art activity video and new art history videos that we may upload. Thank you!